Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I'm Rachel Rosen. I'm the Communications Director for Democratic Majority for Israel. On behalf of our entire board, our board co-chairs, Todd Richmond and Ann Lewis, whom I know are joining us, on behalf of our President and CEO, Mark Melman, thank you for being here, especially during the difficult circumstances, and we hope you and your loved ones are safe. I'm going to hand it over to Mark in just a minute to introduce our distinguished guest. But first, I wanted to go over a couple of items about the discussion today. We're going to take questions. If you have a question for Hen, you can submit it in the Q&A feature of Zoom, or you could submit it in the chat box. For those of you joining us on Facebook, we're excited to have you as well, and you can submit questions through the comments box below the video screen. And with that, I think that we're in pretty good shape. But one thing before I do hand it over to Mark, I know you're looking at, I think you're looking at a graphic now, or you did see a graphic. If you're interested in the event and you like what you hear today, please do follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram. You can also visit our website to sign up for our news and updates, and we're at dmfi.org. With that, Mark, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and thank all of you for joining us. We appreciate it. It's been a very exciting and important time for Democratic Majority for Israel. We've been engaged in a lot of work despite the COVID circumstances, but our work has taken us to platform victories around the country, where we've tried to stop and successfully stop anti-Israel platform planks in state Democratic Party platforms in Texas and in Nevada from Democrats abroad and elsewhere. Just in recent weeks, we're working on the national platform to make sure that we have a pro-Israel national Democratic platform. We've been engaged with Capitol Hill on a variety of initiatives that they're involved with. At the same time, we have a sister organization, DMFI PAC, that is deeply engaged in the campaign world. We just had a very important victory in New Mexico, where we were urging people not to vote for Valerie Plame, who had been long retweeting anti-Semitic and anti-Israel tweets and white supremacist tweets. We criticized her for that, and it had an impact on her race. She lost by almost 20 points, despite running essentially ahead for a while and even for a longer while with her opponent. We're now engaged in a critically important race. DMFI PAC is engaged in a critically important race for Eliot Engel, who's the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and serves a vital function for the pro-Israel community. He's a clear progressive. He's being challenged by an anti-Israel candidate who is backed by a number of anti-Israel organizations. It's a critically important race for our community. We're deeply engaged in that as well, engaged in a significant campaign by mail, by telephone, and online as well. So it's a very busy time for us, but it is in addition to what's happening with George Floyd and with the issues around racial justice in the United States, it is also Pride Week. So it is our great pleasure to have Hen Mazzig with us. You have probably read his work in the Los Angeles Times or in the Jewish Chronicle or in the Forward or many, many other places where his award-winning pieces have appeared. Your children, your grandchildren, maybe you yourselves have heard him on campus. He's spoken to thousands of students around the country, taking a pro-Israel message, progressive pro-Israel message to college campuses around the country and in Europe. As a younger person, slightly younger person, he served in the IDF as an officer, an openly gay officer. In the IDF, he was with the Kogat unit that handles the coordination between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, and between Israel and the many non-governmental organizations that work in the West Bank, doing water projects and food projects and all kinds of activities, which he may describe for us. But for the last several years, he has really focused his time, effort, and energy on being a messenger for the pro-Israel, for the progressive pro-Israel community. We have supported each other's work from afar, but we are really thrilled and delighted to have Hen with us today to talk to us about gay rights in Israel during Pride Week, but also to talk to us about the demographics of Israel and misunderstandings of Israel that exist in the United States and the progressive community. Without further ado, Hen Mazzig.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you for having me. And once again, I so support everything you do and you stand for. And it's a pleasure to find. And I don't want to say thanks to COVID-19, but I'm speaking with you on virtually because of it, and it's great that we're able to do that. So I'll share 10-15 minutes about myself and speak a bit about demographic of Israel and LGBTQ rights in Israel. And then, as Rachel said, you please send questions if you have. I'm an Israeli writer and a speaker. I've been doing this work for over 10 years. I'm today working on my upcoming book that hopefully will come out next year. It's called Mizrahi, a Jew of Color, and it's basically telling the story of this community, of my community, my family story, and introducing people to a new narrative that they didn't know, not because they didn't want it to know, but there's a whole campaign that is really all about erasing this community. So I'm trying to be an advocate for us. And perhaps that's where I'll start, because my family came to Israel in the early 50s, and they came from Iraq and North Africa. My family from my mother's side came to Israel from Baghdad, where there was 150,000 Jewish people living there for ages. The Babylonian Jewish community, they're called Babylonian because Iraq was Babylon before it was Iraq. And it's really the community that has been there for a long time, even before the Arab colonialism and imperialism of the Middle East, which is another, just a sidetrack, but not really. When I speak on college campuses and people tell me, well, I'm objecting to colonialism and imperialism in the Middle East by being anti-Israel, it's really bizarre. The only colonialism and imperialism in the Middle East is the one of the Arab Empire. The way you recognize an imperial power is by language. So English is an imperial language. It was promoted through colonialism. That's why I speak English. French is an imperial language. Spanish is an imperial language, and Arabic is also an imperial language. And that's why it's spoken in so many countries. There's only one country that people speak Hebrew at, and we're not trying to teach other people or force this language on others. And that's how you really recognize an imperial power. So that's just a point, because it's always so odd to hear that statement. But my family in 1951 had to leave Iraq, my family from my mother's side. When I grew up, my grandmother said the most beautiful things about Baghdad and about Iraq, and how she loved living there and how great of neighbors they had. And only when I started challenging her a bit more, and because my grandmother, Hela, that's her name, Hela is the name of a herb in Arabic. And she's the most loving person. She doesn't like to speak negative on anything. But when I challenge her to hear more about why they left this country, why they left Iraq, a country that she loved so much, she goes back to 1941, years before the creation of Israel, the reestablishment of the Jewish state. My grandmother faced 2 days of pogrom against the Jewish community of Baghdad, where more than 10,000 Jews were injured and violently injured, and over 200 people were killed. It's what we know today as the Fahud. Fahud in Arabic means violent disposition. And that was really the time that the Iraqi ruler reminded the Jewish community of Baghdad of their place, of being dhimmi. Dhimmi in Arabic means a protected minority. And you're protected as long as the ruler wants you to be protected. And in 1941, in June, around this time, this community was remembered their place. And my grandmother tells me how she saw a Jewish mother walking down the street with 9 children and saw an Iraqi police officer shooting all the kids and then shooting the mother, or the following day where she saw her best friend being raped by an Iraqi police officer because she was Jewish, and then mutilated and stabbed to death. And that was really the time where the Jewish community of Iraq realized that they're not safe and they have to find a way out. And they saved money for a long time. And only in 1951 where they saved enough money that they thought that they can live. And they were Zionists long before the creation of Israel. They always prayed to come back to Israel. The Shivat Zion was something very strong for the Iraqi Jewish community. And in 1951, they finally can fulfill their dream and hoping to be free. And when they get to the airport, all of their belonging has been taken from them, and their passport are stamped with never to return, basically stripping them out of their citizenship, and they're coming to Israel. At the same time, my grandparents from my father's side came to Israel from Tunisia, also experiencing a very similar disposition and knowing that they have nowhere else to go, and only Israel was there. So they were very much Zionists, and they were very happy to go back to Israel. But they were also forced out. There wasn't any alternative. And that's the story of 850,000 Jewish refugees from the Middle East and North Africa that were forced out from these countries and came to Israel. And today they make up 53% of the Jewish community in Israel. Often when I speak on campuses around the world and people, tell me that Israel is a white country, or Israel is a country of Europeans, it's really disconnected with the reality that 53%, as I said, are Jews of the Middle East and North Africa. The majority of Jews in Israel are people of the Middle East, and that including the 20% that are Arab Israelis, Christians, and Muslim. Israel is a very Middle Eastern country, and it's a country in the Middle East, and that's why Israeli music is Middle Eastern music. It sounds very like an Arab music, but that's because we are all coming from this culture, and it's a culture that we're maintaining. And I think that the reason that there's this, I do think it's a campaign to taint Israel in a very specific way, is because once you deprive this community out of their culture and their food and our identity, it's another way to dehumanize us and to make us into something that we're not, and not only erasing our history, but using the history and the violence and the disposition that we faced against us. And that's why I'm advocating for this community, and I'm trying to be a voice for the Mizrahi Jewish community, because I truly believe that if we want to achieve peace, we have to start with acknowledging of this trauma of this community of, again, the majority of Jews in Israel today that experienced trauma in the countries that they came from, and then they came to Israel, and from our neighbors, we were reminded of the same trauma that never, sometimes people tell me, that some Mizrahi Israeli tend to be racist to other Arabs, which is completely, misunderstanding the history, because we are also of this ethnicity. We share this ethnicity. We were in the Middle East before the Arab colonialization and the Arab imperialism colonized the Middle East. So it's not racism. And if there is some fear from the Arab empire, is because we were subject of this empire and we were oppressed by them. And the trauma not only continued, it's also, until today, we're seeing violence from those countries. So I think I don't think it's racism. I don't think it's bigotry. I think it's really coming from a place of remembering the past and seeing that the past goes on until today in many aspects. And I grew up in Petah Tikva, and we're talking about pride because it was a challenge to come out of the closet for me to my family, as my family are coming from a different culture. Until today, while I feel really accepted today, it's still a challenge. And it was only when I was 19 when I came out of the closet. It was 2008, and my commander in the army was actually, he wasn't helping me out of the closet. He really pulled me out of the closet, and he said very casually, Hen, you're gay, right? Which was an amazing moment for me, because it gave me an opportunity to come out into who I am, and he supported me a lot. And I came out when I was still a soldier, and I was really worried that coming out as a gay soldier will prevent me from ever being an officer. And again, it was 2008 when it was still don't ask, don't tell in America, and some other armies are upholding policies that really didn't allow LGBTQ soldiers to live to be who they are, basically in the open. Till today, we know that there are challenges for transgender soldiers in different armies in the world. So to have this opportunity to be who I am, and I couldn't be more grateful to my commander. and being able to go on officer training school and becoming a gay officer, which doesn't mean that I went to every base with a pride flag. It just meant that I was able to be who I am, and I had the backing of my commanders, and soldiers knew that I was gay, and they were able to speak to me about it. And several soldiers also came out of the closet to me, and I was able to be just like any other officer, but just being authentic, living my authentic self, and I served in the army at the end for 5 years, and following my military service, I started doing what I'm doing today. And I'm speaking a lot about the work that I've done in the IDF, because my work was really to be the humanitarian officer and assist the other side, working with Palestinian civilians. Because I speak Arabic, it was helpful to communicate with the community. And during my work in the army, I was able to build bridges, and I know for a fact that our work saved lives of Palestinian civilians, but more than that, I'm hoping that this work really affected people and changed their perspective on Israel. After my military service, I also started volunteering at the Israeli LGBTQ Center, the Neo Cat Center, working with Israeli. I was in charge of transgender issues and working with Israeli trans community and helping them in solving problems that they have in front of authorities or with Israeli companies. And it was an amazing experience because I on the one hand, I got to see that, Israel is not perfect. And that's something that we all need to remember, that there's a long way to go to perfection. I mean, we're not as perfect as America is, but maybe one day, no, I mean, every country has issues and we're all trying to work to solve them. And I saw during my time doing this that we have a long way to go. But I also saw how committed that the Israeli authorities and the Israeli companies, everyone that we reached out to, was really committed to making a difference. And that's why today I don't think I would feel as safe as I do here living anywhere else in the world. Tel Aviv is probably, for me, and I've traveled mostly the West, Tel Aviv for me is the safest place to be who I am with all of my identities. It's we're still fighting for same-sex marriage to be. It is acknowledged if it was performed abroad, but because the religious institutions are still in charge of the wedding institution, marriage institution, it's something that we're still working to change. And Israeli LGBTQ community, I've been in a protest just a year ago protesting for same-sex surrogacy laws. So it's a work and it's an uphill battle, but brave people came before me and brave people will come after me, and I'm sure we will. We've gone so far and there's so far to go. So I really much appreciate the past, and I'm looking forward to the future. And I know that brave people are committed to it and are fighting to change it. But there's a lot to be proud of, and if that's that's the theme today, and that's the theme of this week and this month, is to be proud of who you are. And couldn't be more proud to be a Mizrahi Jew, a person that is of Iraqi and Tunisian descent, that is also gay, that is also Israeli, that is a Zionist, and that is progressive and believes in equal rights and social justice in its full extent. And I'm going to advocate for all of these things. But and most of all, I'm proud to be Jewish. And I think that's about my time, right, Rachel?
That's great, Hen. Thanks. Yeah. You're very moving and compelling personal story. And I know I just learned a lot about you, and thank you for sharing it with us. So we're excited to get to questions from our supporters who are joining us today. Please do, if you have a question, if you're joining us on Zoom, you can submit it there through the Q&A feature, or you can chat it to the group. If you're on Facebook, you can submit it in the comments page. And I'll kick it off with a question about LGBTQ rights in Israel. Hen, I know you talked a little bit about this in your opening remarks. This is a question from Rory Wade. With a growing population of the religious community in Israel who increasingly influence politics and which parties get into power, do you worry that the future of the LGBT community and rights in Israel will be under threat, or that progress will be hindered?
Well, I'm trying to steer away from politics in general. I mean, I think that everyone's politics is their own, and while I'm trying to avoid politics, I will say that there's been a lot of progress. I mean, the first openly gay minister in the Israeli government was Amir Ohana from the Likud, a right-wing party that aligns with the Haredi party. So in many ways, I think that the Israeli government finds ways to make things work. With all of my criticism, I don't fear for the future of the LGBTQ community, but I do want it to be a better future. I gave 5 years in the army and 10 years of my life so far, my adult life, defending this country, and I do love this place, and I love the Jewish people with all my heart, and I'm giving all I have to, all I can to do this work, because I truly believe in it. And then to be told by my own country that I can't get married to my boyfriend because he's not Jewish, because he's gay, because we're same sex. All of this is very problematic, and I think we need to change it, and I think we have to change it because some people that don't do that much for the country are able to live their life the way they want to, and it's just not fair. And I do want I aspire. I want Israel to be better. I want Israel to be the best Israel it can be. I think all of us want to see it. So I'm committed to fighting for a change, and I know many activists, really brave activists in Israel that are committed to changing it. So I'm not afraid for the future, and I'm hoping that we can make it a better future.
And I know that Mark mentioned in your bio that you do spend time speaking with American college students. And we have a question from Allison that asks about that experience. When you go to US campuses to talk about LGBT issues, and I'll add other progressive issues, how are you received?
I wish I could say well, because when I first came to the US, I remember being on the plane flying to Seattle, and I read about Seattle for the first time. I'm going to the city that is super progressive, and I thought people are going to love my story and are going to celebrate me because, in the definition, in the American racial construct, I'm a person of color because I'm not white, I'm not black, but I'm in this definition, I'm falling into this category. I'm also part of the LGBTQ community. So I'm Jewish, but I'm not religious. I'm a secular Jew coming from an underprivileged background. I thought that people would want to hear my story, specifically progressive people. And on campuses, I was not only Sean, I was attacked, and one time in London a couple of years ago, 300 students protested my talk and jumped through windows. You can find the videos on YouTube. If you Google my name in London, you'll find it. But it was really a horrific experience, and it's until today, every time this happens, I'm shocked over and over again by how students will react to my story, accuse me of pinkwashing, which is a term that says that Israel gave gay rights and sending gay people like myself around the world to cover up for atrocities that Israel is committing, which is, so bizarre for me to hear queer people, LGBTQ people on the other side, students that are committed to fighting for LGBTQ rights, but on the other hand, will use their LGBTQ identity to attack another country and attack LGBTQ people fighting for fighting for progress. So it's very bizarre because they're accusing me in what they're actually doing. If you're an LGBTQ person, I think you want to support other LGBTQ people and you want to support their struggle for equality. So it's always really bizarre, but it's just a reminder for me that I have to keep on speaking, because I also get really positive responses from Jewish students that are telling me how they're coming from diverse backgrounds and they never feel like they can be their authentic self when they're Zionist. A lot of them are Zionists, and I feel like when they come to my talks and they hear that you can be all of those things, it gives them a lot of pride. So that's why I continue doing that for those students.
If we weren't in the middle of COVID and a worldwide health pandemic, it's Pride Week in Israel. I know it's very much celebrated, particularly in Tel Aviv. Can you take us there? What would that be like? What would the scene be like?
Oh, it's amazing. I would take you through that with the eyes of my boyfriend. He came from London, and it was and he told me that in London it's very commercialized, and you have like big trucks of big companies that are supporting it. And when we came to the march in Tel Aviv, we started in the LGBTQ park in Tel Aviv, where the LGBTQ center is. And you have speeches by activists and leaders in the LGBTQ community. They're all speaking about what we need to fight for. And last year, I think it was on the parade was marking the older community, the older LGBTQ community. The year before it was same-sex parenting, and every year there's the march is dedicated for something. And after those speeches, that the crowd is really, you get to learn something new. You get to understand more of why you're about to march. So before you march and before you get a lot of people get drunk on the way. Before you do that, you get to understand what it is that you're celebrating, and that's really the core of Pride. Pride was a riot, was a protest, was a way to fight for our rights, and that's what we're still doing. And then from the park, we start marching towards the beach, and there's floats and a lot of music. And I remember my boyfriend Mark telling me that he just loved to see all those trucks that were just. It wasn't just truck. Usually in Pride Parade, you have trucks with, people without their shirts and dancing around with little clothing. But in this Pride, he saw such a diversity of trucks. There's trucks for lesbians. There were trucks for even cross-dressers, trucks for drag queens. There's different trucks for cross-dressers and drag queens, and really everyone can feel that they are can be represented and celebrated. And then it ends in a big party in the beach in Tel Aviv, in Charles Clore Garden. It's on the beach, and it's amazing. It's a big party, but it's like a party with a meaning, which is the best way to party, if you ask me.
Okay, here's another question from a supporter. Are there general differences between the experiences of the LGBTQ community among Ashkenazim and Mizrahim in Israel? For example, when it comes to coming out and community acceptance. And on top of that, can you talk about some of the challenges and what work can be done to improve community acceptance?
Yeah, I don't think if there was ever a study being conducted, but I can speak only from my own experience. And I know that my Mizrahi LGBTQ friends had it much worse and much more difficult with their own families. Many of them were, boycotted by the family and had to move and live by themselves. And I think it's rooted into the place where their families came from, very homophobic countries that are still very homophobic and anti-LGBTQ rights. It takes time for this change to happen. I already see a change within my own family, but out of family of my mother's side, I have 12 uncles and aunts. On my father's side, I have 16, and I'm the only one that is openly gay. And they have children, and that's always, I think that it will take more time, but I already see some of my cousins talking to me about that and asking me questions. So I think they are interested in learning more. For my Ashkenazi friends that are LGBTQ, it's much easier, and by and large, not always, but mostly it is. And I think that also, it's rooted in the places you come from, and we are second and third generation of Israelis in this country. So hopefully the fourth, fifth generation will be completely different, and it is actually completely different now that you have LGBTQ actors and actresses and people on the screen that are the host of the biggest, the most watched TV show in the past 10 years, I think, was The Big Brother. I don't know what's the Thank You America, right? But the host was a gay person. It was openly gay Mizrahi, Asi Azal. So I think that's part of the progress, that we are visible. We're very visible, and so it's getting better.
I want to talk about your op-ed in the Los Angeles Times. I think it was last year, and we're going to put a link to it in the chat box so folks can take a look. But the title of this op-ed was, "No, Israel isn't a country of privileged and powerful white Europeans." And in that op-ed, you wrote about demographic ignorance about Israelis. What do you mean?
I think I touched on it a bit in the beginning, but I think people really see Israel as this white colonial power in the Middle East that, usually an empire will send colonies to bring back wealth to a motherland, and this is our motherland. It's not It's not like even Ashkenazi Jews that came from Europe have roots in Israel. We all came from Judea and we all scattered around the world and we came back. But the big issue here is that, that 53% of Israeli Jews are Jews of Mizrahi heritage, or Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. When we ignore this simple fact, I see that a lot of people don't understand Israel, and they can't understand and they can't connect to, why Israeli food is Middle Eastern food and why Israeli music is Middle Eastern music. It's all rooted in where Israel is geographically and the makeup of Israel. And that goes to all those claims about how Israel is is colonizing other people, and it's just not true. And it's also ignoring completely what happened to the 850,000 Jewish refugees from the Middle East and North Africa, my family, that were forced out from the Arab Empire. And we're so used to looking at the Arab world as if it was there forever, and it's not. It's a very recent phenomenon. It's unlike the Arab world that is an imperial power, Israel is a national entity, and it's a Jewish one, and it's 0.03% of the Middle East. So I think that's where everyone are just twisting everything around, and it just and it's important for us to speak about the Mizrahi community and the makeup of Israel, because once we do that, we answer a lot of the claims that anti-Israel people are making against Israel. If that makes sense.
It does.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask you to expand on something else that you've also touched on a little bit, but we have a question that in many ways your story is representative of most Israelis. And why is that misunderstood?
Why is my story misunderstood? I think that people don't see me when they see Israel, or when they hear about Israel. When they watch movies about Jews, they see one specific type of Jewish living. They think that all Jews eat gefilte fish, and I had the gefilte fish once, but I didn't grow up with this. But it's and it's important to understand that being Jewish is a lot of things. I grew up with Cuba. I grew up with Arabic. I grew up listening to Arabic music, and I don't know if we can change Hollywood, and I don't know if we can really right now, maybe one day, but we're already seeing, The Spy with Sacha Baron Cohen on Netflix that is talking about Eli Cohen, the Israeli spy that was Mizrahi. And we need more visibility, and that's what I'm trying to change. And I'm hoping that more young Mizrahi Jews will see it and understand that their story is so important to the understanding of what being Jewish is. And it's not just the Mizrahim, also Ethiopian Jews and knifing Jews and Jews of every heritage need to bring their story forward. And we need to expand what it means to be Jewish. But specifically in regards to Israel, when I see people that advocate for Israel, there aren't many Mizrahim that are doing it. There aren't many gay Mizrahim that are doing it. A lot of us just, prefer to stay here and work in high tech, or get ourselves, get our career together. And my mom is very upset about what I'm doing. She says I should, pursue my career, but she doesn't think it's a real job. But for me, it is, and I'm continuing to do that, and I hope that more Mizrahi advocates will emerge, and more diverse Jews will start speaking on behalf of our community.
I want to ask you about another op-ed you wrote. This one was in JTA, and it's titled "Mizrahi Jewish Spies Fought to Build Israel. Their Descendants Still Encounter Racism There." Will you just talk a little bit about that piece and what inspired you to write it?
Yeah, it was actually inspired by Matti Friedman's book, Spies of No Country, where he went and interviewed some of those spies, Mizrahi spies that, like Eli Cohen, were also working before the establishment of Israel, were working in Arab countries to spy for Israel. It was important for me to write this piece because, first of all, I'm accused of being an Israeli spy very often, and I thought it was a way to counter this argument. But it was important for me to remind people that Israel was built by Jews from all over the world, and Zionism was not just something that was invented in Europe. As in the first Zionist Congress, the World Zionist Congress in first part of the 1900s, Mizrahi Jews and Iraqi Jews wanted to be a part of it, and they started movements to, and they even purchased some lands in the land of Israel, and many of them were committed Zionists that are until today are Zionists. Of course, there was a minority of assimilated Jews that wanted to be Arabs and wanted to be. We were never treated as Arabs; we were treated as Dhimmis, as I said. So we're very proud to be Iraqi Jews, but we were never. We were never Arabs, because Arab was a title that was saved for a specific type of people. And I was, in this article, I was trying to talk a bit about the challenges that we faced when this community, Mizrahi community, first came to Israel. Challenges that we're still facing until today. While we are the majority in Israel, we're still very much underrepresented in the Israeli academia today. Only 9% of the lecturers are Mizrahi. There are more Arab Israelis in the academia teachers than there are Mizrahi. There was never a head of Israeli theater that was Mizrahi. There was never a prime minister that was Mizrahi, as we know. Even the Knesset is, we're very much underrepresented compared to how big this community is. So I wrote this op-ed because I was trying to get this point across that while we are the majority, we're still there's a long way to go, and I think it's really true about every part of my identity that I believe that a change is needed, and I'm trying to work for this change, and I know there's a lot of people doing it as well. But if we're looking at the most recent report on the wage gap between Ashkenazim and Mizrahim in Israel, Ashkenazim are 30% of Israeli Jews, and there's still 30% wage gap between second and third Ashkenazim to second and third generation of Mizrahim, which is, it tells us a lot of what we need to do and how we need to focus on. I think it should start with education, and high schools in the periphery of Israel get less funding than high schools in Tel Aviv, or they have more majors than if you go outside of Israel and you go to the south. The majors that you'll find there are engineering, mechanical engineering, and or householding. And if you go to Tel Aviv, there's a variety of majors that the student can get. And the majority of people of Jewish community in the south and in the north, in the periphery, are Mizrahim and Ethiopians. And there's a need to change that. That's what we need to do.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about the U.S.-Israel relationship. And I wanted to ask, what do you think are some of the progressive values that America shares with Israel? We hear politicians talk about this a lot, but would love to get your perspective.
Right. Well, I mean, we definitely share, the American people and Israeli people share the value of freedom and equality. We want everyone to be able to succeed and be the best version of themselves that they can, and we want to support that. And I think Israelis and Americans alike are believe in these values of equality and freedom. I know that right now there's some social issue in America, that there are protests for racial equality, and I think that's something that is very important for us in Israel. There were several protests in Israel as well, in Tel Aviv, supporting the protests for racial equality, and that's something that we really care about in Israel. And I think it comes also from the fact that majority of Israel are people of color, and we understand the pain. And I know that in America it's also understood, and I think that's why it's receiving so much attention. And I think that's something that we have in common as well.
We have a question from Naomi Friedman, and she asks about, has the LGBT Jewish community reached out to the LGBT non-Jewish community in Israel? Are these communities in touch with the Palestinian LGBT communities? Have these interactions been positive?
Well, I know that there are some overlaps definitely with Israeli LGBTQ institutions that are helping. It's not, personally, even when I worked for the New York Art Center, I often worked with Muslim Israelis and Christian Israelis, and they are included as part of the LGBTQ community. What I love about the LGBTQ community in Tel Aviv is that it's so inclusive, that everyone can feel at home in their in our communal spaces. I see this. I see this as a hope. I mean, the Jerusalem Open House, for example, is serving mostly, I think, non-Jews, and it's. I think this is where our community, like minorities that are non-Jewish, that would otherwise feel not accepted in some places within the LGBTQ community, they feel like they have home, and I would feel bad to speak on their behalf, but that's what I saw, and I saw from many of the people that I worked with, that because they are LGBTQ Israelis but non-Jewish, they still this fact makes them feel more belong.
And we have a question from Todd Richmond. He's our board co-chair, and he says, "Thank you again for speaking. Amazing. As someone that has roots in Arab lands, I'm curious to know your thoughts and opportunities about the potential warming of ties with some of the Arab countries."
I am so hopeful about that. I've been following very closely what's going on with Saudi Arabia, and they open. I don't know if it's just an online account, but an online account was opened from Saudi Arabia called the Jewish UAE Center, and I was I was so excited to see it, because I really think that the hope for peace is rooted in us in the Arab world understanding that most of us are Jews, like that came from those countries. They know it, and they just need to acknowledge it. And I think it will help not only them, not only us Mizrahi Jews, but it will also help them. And to see that Saudi Arabia is warming up to Israel, and to see other countries that are starting to develop warmer relationships, it's the biggest hope for me, and I think that's where peace will come from. If Israel will start this allyship with other Arab countries, and focusing on what we have in common, and bringing them together, will really could make a big difference, and is the hope for peace. Because at the end, I think it's we need to understand that we're going to have to live with each other. And I know that they understand that there's a lot of opportunities in being in good relationship with Israel, and we have definitely a lot of opportunities in having good relationship with Arab countries, and I think Israel is ready for it, and I think there is a new awakening in the Arab world, especially I'm going back to Saudi Arabia, because it's really the biggest hope with King Salman 2030 plan that is planning to really change Saudi Arabia and help it progress to a modern and technological country. That's I think that they understand that if they will work with Israel, it will be very helpful for this effort. So I'm very hopeful, and there are going to be flights now from after the coronavirus from Israel, or Israelis with Israeli passport will be able to enter Saudi Arabia, which is a huge step forward.
I'm going to do, I think, 2 more questions, and then I want to be mindful of the time. Of course, I believe that there are many pro-Israel Democrats, such as ourselves, such as DMFI supporters on the call today. And I wanted to ask, what can pro-Israel Democrats do to support some of the social justice causes you work on?
Well, I think just what you can do from America, other than supporting organizations like Democratic Majority for Israel and other groups that are promoting social progress in Israel, is to be ambassadors of education and to talk about us. And I see how, when I left Israel and I started doing what I'm doing abroad and came back, I found that people started listening to me because I was speaking to an American audience, and whatever is happening in America also affects Israel. And when my article got into the LA Times, it got a lot of attention in Israel as well. And people started to have this conversation about Mizrahim again, or about LGBTQ issues. So I do believe that the conversation in America, or the conversation within the American Jewish community, can really affect decisions that are made in Israel. So I would say be ambassadors of education and speak about these issues. I'm writing a lot of articles, and I'm writing now a book because I really want to give people resources that they can share. You can follow my website or my Twitter, and I share every article that I write. And I think that's the best way for someone that is not in Israel to contribute, other than supporting and donating to the LGBTQ Center in Israel, or supporting Mizrahi organizations. I can also share with you a link later. I think that the most important thing is to change the perception in America about Israel and about what we are, and about the demographic ignorance, as I call it.
The final question to you is, for pro-Israel Democrats like ourselves, what do you think is the best articulation of the story of Israel?
Wow. So it's a story of an indigenous people that returned to their homeland and revived an ancient language, and have turned the desert into an incredible country that is not perfect, that is a work in progress, but it's progressing, and there's so much to be proud of in 70 years. Just imagine what will happen in 30 or 50 or another 70 years. There's a lot to be proud of, and I think that's also very important for me. Other than all the issues and the social issues that I'm trying to fix here, I want people to be proud of Israel, because there's a lot to be proud of. There's tons to be proud of. There's a lot of work to do, and we're saying Am hanetzach lo mefached miderech ha'aruka, which means the people that have been here forever are not afraid of a long road. That never scared us before. So we just keep marching.
And thank you so much for joining us. I would like to toss it over to Todd Richmond, but I'm not sure if Todd is still on the call with us. Oh, here he is.
Hi, how are you? I'm sorry about that. We were switching Zooms from my iPhone to my computer, but wow, you are amazing, and we are so fortunate to have you on this Zoom call today and have you on the front lines with us, fighting to ensure that people understand the real story of what Israel is, who Israel is, and why it's so important that people within the Democratic Party, within the progressive movement, within the liberal movement, support a strong U.S.-Israel relationship. So we hope you will come back, and speak again. And everyone should follow Hen on Twitter and all the other social media aspects. As Rachel said before, please join us and following us as well on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and all of these other things that you can see here. Support us. We are an organization that is on the front lines, fighting for what you believe in terms of a strong U.S.-Israel relationship. We have been the only organization that has been on the ground during the Democratic primary to races today, to fighting to make sure that the Democratic platform is pro-Israel, to make sure that platforms across the United States and all 50 states are pro-Israel. And I am also very proud to say that our board, which is a distinguished board, very diverse, Megan Stabler, who's very active in the LGBTQ community, Sam Lauder, one of our board members from San Francisco, who has been honored by a wider bridge, and of course, my amazing and wonderful co-chair, Ann Lewis, who has also been honored by a wider bridge. So we enjoy working with the LGBT community. We enjoy working with individuals like yourself. We enjoy being pro-Israel Democrats. And from there, I just encourage everybody, please, please, please support our mission by going to dmfi.org and contributing to all the work that we do. So I hope everyone stays safe. Have a great week. And thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thank you so much.
Toda rabah.
Toda. Bye bye, everyone.
Thanks, Ken. Bye.